Well, good evening or good morning, wherever, whichever time zone everybody is in. I'm Mahmood Khan, and I have the privilege of moderating this second session. And I think it's a tough act to follow after the first discussion that Tachi just led, which is a very robust discussion around biology, and we're moving from the biology to technology in general. And we've got a wonderful speaker to kick things off on this topic. And if you haven't received it, I'd highly recommend this provocative article in the Gerontological Society that I think most of us have on the fourth wave of technology. Joe Coughlin is director of MIT's Age Lab. He teaches at MIT in Urban Studies and Planning at the Sloan School of Advanced Management. Conducts a lot of research, obviously got an extensive exposure and interaction, consulting with industry, public entities, government, and truly has been pushing our thinking in this space in so many frontiers. I won't dwell on the rest of his resume. I think everybody has it in this. This topic is fascinating for me. Since my background being a biologist, I've always thought about not only what are the engineering and technologies that can enhance and support function, in this case in aging human beings, but I hope we also get into the discussion of how do you bridge biology with engineering in this aging space. So we've typically looked at engineering as one discipline, as a vertical. We've looked at biology as another. And yet we're at an era where biology is informing engineering and engineering is informing our understanding of biology. And we have many of you in this discussion today that have bridged both worlds. So I think this will be a robust and interesting discussion around this. And it leads to, of course, the public health implications, or the ability to intervene on the public health side, but also gather data and better understand our existing interventions in that space. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Joe to lead off this session and deliver our keynote.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And, I see many friends in gallery view, and I see folks that I know your work. I am honored and privileged to be here. So thanks for letting me share a few words. I will use a little bit of PowerPoint here, but don't worry, I'm not going to make this death by PowerPoint, but hopefully have a little bit of fun and a little bit of pushing us all a little bit more to think about how technology can be a tool, certainly, but how we also need to think about the social, the political, and economic dynamics of it. I, for one, believe the technology is already there. The question is, how do we move it out of the laboratory into the living room of people's lives overall? So let me do a little bit of a share and a technology change up for a second. So I wanted to change it up a little bit because some of you are up in the middle of the night, some in the middle of the morning, and some of us are just past dinner time. So I figured we could use a little bit of color. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about how we can write a new chapter of technology pushing our definition of aging in general. And actually, I was kind of teasing Victor a little while ago about having a medical approach, if you will, to aging is not incorrect, but it may be incomplete on how we want to think about things. So let's get it going on this. So as many of you know, I'm very fond of this young lady as Sarah Nass. She was 119 years old in 1999, 119. She had no problem with the aging issue, but she had a comment that was she made that I think really should inform how we think about aging. Some journalists had the profound, and the only way to put it, profound chutzpah to ask her, why do you enjoy living so long? And Sarah Nass came back with an answer far better than any researcher, pundit, engineer, whatever it might be. She said, I have my health. There's one half the equation. But the big part of her answer was, and I can do things. We have to start thinking about vitality and functionality. Some of the work that many of you have done, like Linda and the like, around that is where we need to push forward, because right now aging is still stuck as a problem to be solved rather than an opportunity to be realized. So some of you probably chuckled a little bit if you saw the article or even some other material I put out there. The pandemic really did change a great deal. I know it's starting to sound like a trite, broken record. But the fact of the matter is that while all of us were out there buying pallet loads of toilet paper, and you know who you are, actually, one of the things we saw in the United States and Northern Europe, at least where we have data, we also saw middle-aged and even older folks going out and buying smart speakers, tablets, computers, making sure the Wi-Fi worked, even doorknob security. I would suggest to you that technology became the new toilet paper. And in fact, we started to push technology not just into our lives, but into our cognitive space in terms of older adults who may have pushed back on it before, not wanted it, suddenly saw a value in it. You know, it wasn't that older adults don't get technology per se. Sarah, who's on the call here, knows that best. Sarah Saja. But the fact of the matter is we never raised the value proposition high enough for many older adults to say this is worth the time, the hassle, and indeed the money. But the pandemic certainly did that. And my team did an ongoing set of surveys and whatnot through the pandemic showing the range of technologies that were being purchased, particularly by caregivers. In fact, one of the things that we found is across the age cohorts, trust, comfort, and interest increased across the generations in terms of wanting to see more technology. I do think that we got about 5 to 7 years advance in terms of how much is going to be in the home compared to where it was before. Caregivers were now becoming omni-channel. They were using tablets, computers. Suddenly all those devices that they thought they might want, not want, maybe their parents won't accept, suddenly we saw a lot of people starting to adopt that. I don't want you to think that I'm saying, oh, it's all good. All older adults are taking technology. Far from that. But there is a causeway, shall we say, that has bridged, if you will, the digital divide. But here's the part I want to tell you about. As many of you know, I love stories because I believe that the oldest technology in the world and the most powerful, with all respect to some of us, it's not the genome, it's not biology, it's not engineering, not internet, not space travel. The oldest, most powerful technology is the story. Yeah, you heard me right. The story. Think about what stories do. They tell us why we do certain things, why we don't do others, what's possible, what's acceptable, what's affordable, what's even available out there. The story we tell, how we define, shall we say, the issue rather than problem, the issue of aging is going to define in and out the range of technologies, policies, and services that we will deem to be appropriate. It will not singularly be a clinical trial. It will be the social story that we tell that will make technology the aid that it could be. But let's talk about where stories began. It began with medical science. Think in the 1800s in the UK, and then came to the United States, and frankly, many of us are still subscribing to it. The idea of aging was about vital force or vital energy. Those of you that are medical doctors know that it still is out there as a legacy, if you will. The notion that we were all born with this certain amount of vital energy or vital force, like a glass that was full. But if, as you used it, as you worked, as you did anything fun, by the way, you drained down that vital force, that vital energy. You became a glass half empty rather than half full. But listen to what stories do. It's not just a story about how medical researchers put this into our minds. It changed our vocabulary. Remember, if you got so tired you could not work, remember, if you didn't have family to take care of you in the 1800s, early 1900s, you became tired. And what would you do if you became tired, if you didn't have someone to support you? You would be so tired you would have to retire. We started creating an entire language. And by the way, language and stories also create what? Institutions. Think about this. If you did not work and you did not have family to support you, by definition, you were poor. You went into alms homes. Guess what alms homes turned into in the UK and Germany and North America? Alms homes turned into poor homes. Many of them were then converted into what? Poor homes became nursing homes. And we also know the, shall we say, the straight linear line, if you will. In fact, this whole story still sticks with us. How many of us have read waves and waves of books about seismic activity and waves and storms and the like to describe perhaps the greatest success of humankind living longer into a problem? Think of how many economists out there have printed documents by saying, well, aging is a problem. Of course it is. We're still subscribing to stories that were created in the 1930s with the same policies and same approaches and the same ideas of how we look at the issue, whether it's retirement or anything else. And those stories even have consequences for science and technology. Think about a company like Heinz created Heinz Senior Foods. They have no problem with money. They had no problem with expertise. But the way they defined the issue was, well, let's see, older adults, they don't have any taste. Apparently they don't have any teeth. So I know we're going to create Heinz Senior Food, baby food for older people. Needless to say, that crashed and burned. We know that Del Webb said, wow, if you got time on your hands, relatively healthy, and you've got a pension, what are we going to do? Oh, I know. We'll make it a time for golf and play. Again, not incorrect, but incomplete. These are the stories that have framed up how we think about aging. Senior housing long before the pandemic was under siege because the next generation of older adults going, I don't want that. It's not fitting. But the story was, remember, it's all about care and the like. And yes, that's absolutely true for a percentage of the population, but not everyone. And then let's start getting into the technology. How about this device here? The help by phone, can't get up type device. Think about this. That one survey suggested that only 35% of people over 75 consider themselves old. But 100% of us that wear something on our jacket or on our wrist saying, old man about to fall down, know that we're old. The implications of that is not just vanity. The implication is as we design these systems and these technologies, remember, technology is not just about what it does for you, it's what it says about you. And very few people want a device that says this is for old people because we know that young people won't buy it, but we also know that older people will run in horror. And this is what I was chuckling about right before we got started. One of the challenges we have around technology and aging is the old story, the story that we should retire about old age being a problem and being about retirement and pulling back and being tired, has us only considering technologies generally that are about our health. I don't know if any of you know this. I mean, you're all aging researchers, but if you look at the narrative that's out there, after age 50, the only thing you're going to be doing, well, actually, there's going to be two things. One is we're going to be reminding you to take your medication. And secondly, it's all about your blood pressure. Again, those are medically very great things. But we have a sea of people out there doing technology research and development. And when they hear the story of aging as currently framed, they think it's all about medical. And by the way, not only do they think it's about medical, apparently this is a color. No, your screen's not going badly. The idea that older people, it doesn't have to be stylish or fashionable, whatever. It can be gray and it can be boring. Some of us get really sexy with the color though. We use this. I call this clinical blue. How many people do we know would actually want this on their nightstand, let alone their living room coffee table? So as a paper that is circulating out there, I want you to think about how we have 4 waves of technology thinking, and none of them have totally receded, but these waves are kind of framing up how we're thinking about technology for an aging society. So that first wave, again, none of these have receded. Aging and technology is a problem of interface. I love this photo because I'm not sure whether that's a remote control or a self-defense device. What this really is engineers and designers not having much imagination on how to provide functionality as well as something that can actually be something that you'd want to have in your house. But think about the decades of research that we're worrying about the mouse or the size of the keyboard or the size of the font. Again, we're still doing that in my own lab. Not wrong, but that was how we were thinking about technology as an issue. And then we've had smart. Remember, everything is smart. Essentially, the technology world when it comes to aging, and we still see a lot of this, I've got a sensor. Do you have the time? So whether it's smart toilets, toasters, refrigerators, whatever it is, I'm going to monitor, manage, and motivate you from here to anywhere. And maybe dignity and privacy will have to take literally a back seat in the case of a smart toilet. Now we're in an era of aging as economy, and aging as longevity economy, if you will. And we're starting to see some big players get in there. And this is good because this will help with distribution. But it's starting to change how we think about technology in general. Maybe with these players coming in, we'll start to change the narrative about aging being about vitality, functionality, what you can do, even the F word, even fun. But finally, the fourth wave that we really need to push, and I think the group that you have all put together and which you're contributing to has a great deal to say about this around the world. In fact, this is a transition from the last panel that we heard. Aging is a problem of equity. These technologies do no good if they only stay in the hands of very few, or they stay in the hands of the most luxurious lifestyle. How do we turn technology into something that we can access for all? So let me give you just a very quick look at the technologies that are out there with a picture that's coming. But I want you to start thinking about, how do we think about technology around my functionality, the idea of connecting me with friends? As I said, the F word, fun and fashion. You know, this is not, so shall we say, going off in terms of not being medical. I want you to think about the holistic approach to the whole health of an individual. We're all excited about social determinants of health. We have to treat the entire person, not simply whether it's about their medical in the physiological sense well-being. So function, we know that the robots are out there. Many of our colleagues online there in Japan, we see a lot of work coming out there in robots that are going to be helping us in senior housing and long-term care, and perhaps even at home. In fact, one of my good friends and former MIT colleague, many of you may recognize this little guy who lives in my lab. This is Paro, the robot that is made in Japan, if you will. So we have robots certainly out there already on the market, but boy, in terms of price, they are very expensive overall. We have robots out there to remind us, again, of course, to take our medications. After all, that is apparently all we're going to be doing. We have the refrigerators and kitchens and housing that are getting more and more smart, where frankly, my refrigerator very soon will be able to order my Ben & Jerry's double fudge brownie ice cream before I even know that I'm out of it. And I'm saying that in part in jest, but we're starting to see a world where the home is becoming a platform of service, not simply a place to live. We're seeing Amazon and insurance providers and the like starting to create not just smart watches, but devices that are wearable and are being used to be able to identify your stress and overall well-being to actually start to price your life insurance. And the on-demand economy for those convenience-starved millennials who want it delivered or food made or have their wash done out. Guess what? During the pandemic and even before that, this became a form of new assisted living, a virtual assisted living in many cases. So when we think about technology, it's not just about the bits, the bytes, and the devices. It's also about how it connects to the outside world to provide its services elsewhere. We know that Philips licenses technology from MIT to give you essentially almost a checkup a day, from skin to temperature to your eye, how your eyes look and the like. So these things are out there. How do we get them into everyone's life? My own team created this little device that monitors everything in the home, whether you want to or not. Temperature, heat, movement, where you are. In fact, I can even build for you a heat map, essentially where you've been all day, how much time you spent there, and what you've been doing. The sensors and technologies are out there. I would submit to you that the greatest challenge of technology today is one of systems integration rather than systems development alone. And finally, I'm turning my friend off here. And also social isolation and loneliness, very critical, as we know, to healthcare. As we know from a meta-analysis done a number of years ago, that isolation and loneliness is the equivalent of physical equivalent of upwards of 11 cigarettes per day. So how can we use technology, if you will, to treat that? We know that Facebook is now being called the social media nursing home, because among the fastest growing group of people on Facebook are women over the age of 50. No kid wants a Facebook page anymore because basically no one wants to post what they did Friday night to have their mother, let alone their grandmother, see it on a Saturday morning. We know that Wii games and PlayStations, whatnot, are creating entire online leagues for bowling in Japan, in the United States, in the UK. In fact, this one picture here of these three folks is a senior center outside of UK. And by the way, whole new medical condition, Wii wrist and Wii elbow, where people are playing with such verve that they want to win and score that they're hurting themselves. My team developed a game that allowed you to do exercise to enable you to be able to stay well behind the wheel. So strengthening flexibility and the like, so that driving a little longer safely is a possibility. We're seeing industry worldwide starting to get into this space. We're starting to see companies like Lululemon and the like start to bring in technology around health, well-being, and proactive well-being into the home. Now you're saying, well, that's not aimed at aging people. That's right. It's becoming a new lifestyle that when it's in my home in my 40s, It'll also be there in my 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and well beyond. So we're starting to see this convergence of technology and getting it into our lives, not through a prescription, not through the discharge nurse, not through an alarm company, but actually mainstreaming it. That's good news. One of my students helped develop this endeavor, the idea of virtual reality, if you will, for entertainment for those at 85 and older. You can go anywhere. You can go to the Louvre, Machu Picchu. By the way, as a side note, the number one place that folks over age 85 in nursing homes would like to go, or assisted living when they have the choice, is not someplace fancy. They want to see the street that they grew up on. And as I said, the robots are out there to remind you to take your meds, to help you with a recipe. And by the way, one robot is out there. Apparently, some researcher has decided that telling a joke or insulting you actually helps your cognitive function. I find that fun because I actually have 2 daughters and they insult me for free every day. Finally, fashion matters. How this stuff looks, how we get in people's homes. Think about how Apple is probably one of the premier aging technology companies out there. And they did it right. They did it by stealth. I now grant you the fall detection goes on if you're 65, because we know that 64-year-olds don't fall. But at 65, boy, that just turns on right crazy. AFib and the like. The more we can see these various devices be age technology by stealth, the more likely that people will buy them without asking about reimbursement, the more likely that they will wear them. And like the personal emergency response systems, where only 4% of the 65 plus that actually need them use them, these they actually use because other people are as well. One of my students, Sector Hudgens, created Withings, the idea of having smart scales and watches and whatnot that don't even look like smart devices, don't look like an old man's, they're just cool. They also do the monitoring and the managing that you might want. And, something, the folks that are using augmented reality for glasses or hearing aids, or the fact that all of us are now got something in our ears, especially on Zoom, this may be the greatest advancement for hearing aids. As many of us know, the average person waits 10 years before getting a hearing aid, even when they've needed it. Why? Because they don't want the stigma. Well, now that everyone's got something hanging out of their ear, the stigma, including the whole use of hearables, might actually advance that greatly. So let me end on the following, a kind of a set of recommendations or cautionary issues that I think that would be great for you to be able to include in a statement. I think that moving aging and technology forward, at least in the idea of information technology and communications technology and the like, and even VR and the like, we rest on 3 things: partnerships, podiums, and I'll explain that in a moment, and people. First thing is, partnerships are going to be key. Aging is far too big for it to be a government program. It's far too big for it to only be a market solution. It's going to take both of those. We're going to see senior housing partnering with major medical schools to provide telemedicine, telehealth, and therapy, like my cousin receiving it here for Parkinson's from Johns Hopkins, and she lives in very far upstate New York. We're going to be seeing more around the pharmaceutical industry, where the molecule is going to become a service. The notion that, frankly, we know that the big drug era is, shall we say, ebbing, but we also know that for those who want to maintain patent rights, they're going to be providing devices and services around that to provide better adherence and hopefully better outcomes as well. We're seeing CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, and the like not just have a clinic to check you for strep or give you a flu shot. They're getting into mental health. They're getting into dental health and the like. We should look at these as powerful agents of distribution, as well as how technology is coming into our lives. Best Buy, CVS, and whatnot are creating entire aisles now that are starting to be smart home, but technology and aging aisles as well. My own team believes that we're going to be using these sensors and putting them together with the on-demand economy with robotic assistants as interface, but they're going to be branded by major providers out there so that your home becomes, shall we say, given to a particular brand to have all that technology integrated. In fact, you may not even buy it. It may actually be by subscription. Podium. This sounds a little silly, perhaps. Notice the empty podium? I said this to Victor just as we were getting started. I want you to think any issue that makes progress is owned. Yes, issues are owned. Think about it. There are certain medical category discussions you would not be able to have legitimately in a political sense or social sense or a media sense unless you had an MD after your name. You can't talk about technology fully, perhaps, unless you're an engineer. They're owned by, shall we say, professions, but they're also owned politically. And one of the things I would like to say about the United States, Europe, and I could even say that probably Singapore is further out than most of us, No one owns technology for functionality and vitality. There is no assistant secretary or director or political appointee that has a subcommittee on Capitol Hill that says this is important and we're going to fund it. The interest groups have not circled. There is no major committee. We can talk about special committees on aging and the like, but they don't have a podium. We have no champion right now that keeps on pounding the podium saying this needs to be done. And they have issues. The issues they need to put out there are not just funding for the research, but ensuring accessibility. How many of us even know these technologies exist if we need them, especially for those who are less educated? How many people are out there to be able to teach us how to use the technologies that we're talking about to get them into people's lives and homes? And some of you got a chuckle out of a comment I made in the paper that is circulating. Also, even if you have the money, even if you know where to buy the technology and you have a trusted source of that information, do you live where broadband is like electricity or water? The fact is even in cities, let alone rural areas, we have a hard time getting enough speed, let alone broadband coverage, to make any of these gee whiz technologies functional. And then lastly, affordability. We have to make these affordable. Now, grant you, over time, all this technology becomes affordable. I'm one of those crazy people in 1985 who bought a computer for $5,000 because I wanted twin floppy drives and 5 hertz speed. But the fact of the matter is, in the long run, it does become affordable. But as my father said, yeah, but in the long run, we're all dead. We now need to think about how we can use government procurement power, not simply to buy the technology, but to bring the prices down by putting it into people's lives in affordable housing and the like. They're doing it in Singapore. They're doing it in Hong Kong. They can certainly do it in the United States and elsewhere. And also fear of being hacked. We're talking about cybercrime against companies and organizations. You watch, it's coming to our individual, and especially to older people who are going to be, shall we say, be the lead adopters. They're also going to be the lead guinea pigs that are much more vulnerable than many of us. And then lastly, it's about people. Do we have the people that can use the technology that we're talking about putting into our healthcare systems, into our transportation system and the like, an aging society? What does that next generation care force look like? How are they being trained? We did a study that shows the top medical schools, top social workers, gerontology and like, the care force, those being trained, CME is not going to cover it. They're still not being socialized entirely. That because I don't touch you doesn't mean I didn't give you care. Think about the fact that in many ways, telemedicine has been around since the 1890s. I bet a number of you remember the article, I think it was 1897 in the Lancet, the advent of this thing called the telephone. Somebody wrote a paper saying, this might be actually good for maybe heart treatment. Don't know, but it sounds like a possibility. It took a pandemic and over 120 years for us to move it into the home. Why? It wasn't because the people didn't want it. It wasn't just about reimbursement. The medical profession in general said, well, wait a minute, no, I'm trained to provide care by seeing the patient, by touching the patient. I'm not indicting the medical system by any stretch. What I'm indicting is our education system has not integrated the new ways of using technology into the fresh out professionals out there. So they don't call it telemedicine. They simply call it medicine. So lastly, we need to think about what is that next generation care force going to look like? What are the new professions that we're going to envision? Not simply providing new tools to old professions. This is going to require some new thinking that's beyond technology, but about the social infrastructure of getting it out there. So let me end on this. Technology rarely helps you do your job better if you use it appropriately. I'd like to say that this will show my own age. The Selectric typewriter, if we only used a Mac or computer or whatever time in the 1980s to only replace our computer as a typewriter, as a word processor, and frankly, you would not be optimizing it. You would be essentially getting a faster horse instead of driving a car. Technology fundamentally changes what we do. So as we have our discussion on the power of technology to change an aging world, to improve our life, or as Sarah Nass said, to have her health and to do things, we also have to ask, what are the institutions, the people, the policies and processes to make these devices a reality in everyone's life? So Vannevar Bush, who is a science advisor to FDR and Dean of Engineering at MIT, I'm going to tweak one of his favorite quotes. His quote is that science, as he said, was the endless frontier. Let's tweak that a little bit. Science in the service of quality of life, or technology in the quest for ever improving quality of life across the lifespan, is an endless frontier. Let's get to it. Let's enjoy it. And thank you all for having me. I look forward to the conversation.
Joe, thank you. An amazing, broad perspective on multiple facets of aging. I'm sure we're going to of aging and technology. I'm sure we're going to get into some of those discussions. But before we go on, for those of you not aware, it's one thing. I'm only joining and participating here at an odd hour, but Joe has been kind enough to accept to deliver this amazing speech on his birthday. And so maybe we can collectively wish Joe a happy birthday from around the world, let's say.
Thank you. That's great. You have to say that if you're going to talk about aging and longevity, what better day to give a talk, right?
Yeah, happy birthday, Joe.
Thank you, Victor.
And also great to see you to see you below your waist. We now know what you wear.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you know, my students, when I started teaching online, my students asked me a question. I didn't know how to take it. They said, Joe, are you Donald ducking? I had no idea what that was. So they said, stand up. So I stood up, and apparently I didn't realize it, but Donald Duck, think about what we've exposed our children to. Wears a bow tie and a jacket, but never wears any pants.